people will recognize that they can't just look to their leaders. We have to change from the bottom up. Every important social movement has started with small groups and started from the bottom up. And so I feel that the revolution that's necessary now is going to have to start from the bottom up. And it's going to have to start from the recreation of communities, because that's how we were supposed to live. That's how we thrive.
This next episode is with international best-selling author Lynne McTaggart. She happens to be the author of this month's Book Nook pick, The Power of Eight. I've been so excited to sit down with the author of this book. She's touted as one of the world's top 100 spiritual leaders. She's known for her groundbreaking work in consciousness and the power of our thoughts. Over the years, Lynne has been touted as a metaphysical rock star. She's the Madonna of the quantum world, the Malcolm Gladwell of new science, and my favorite, she's even been called the Dalai Mama. In this episode, I sit down and get to ask her tons of questions about the power of our ability to heal our lives and the community and the world through our thoughts and intentions. Lynne also shares a lot of her upcoming events and experiments that you can participate in for free. Very excited to hear your thoughts, comments, and questions on this episode. Okay, so honored. I mean, I really can't thank you enough for sitting and taking this time. I know you're so busy. I'm so honored to pick your brain and ask all these questions of you. I wanted to just a little intro for the members of the Beehive that'll be popping on here. So for more than 20 years, Lynne McTaggart, an internationally best-selling and award-winning author and journalist, has been examining the bridge between frontier science and spirituality. This is like one of my favorite topics. She's mainly known for the quality of her narrative nonfiction and the depth of her research, which we're going to get to go into today. She's consistently voted one of the world's top 100 spiritual leaders for her groundbreaking work with the power of thoughts. And she is particularly interested in, and we'll talk about this today, the power of group intention and the mirror effect. So it's not only transforming the recipients, but reflecting back to the senders. Lastly, she's also a tireless campaigner for consumer rights in healthcare, which is one of my main values. So, Lynne, thank you so much for being here with us.
It's my great pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, and just a little bit of housekeeping. So Beehive members, the members of the community, you guys do get the opportunity to hang out after the live podcast recording and ask your Q&A of Lynne. I know many of you submitted your questions. We'll be asking them here on this recording. You guys can also use the chat room for any questions as they come up during the call. So Lynne, I just want to start by asking, what inspired you to explore the power of intention and group dynamics in such depth? I'm curious if you had a personal experience that sparked your journey into this work.
It was a professional experience, actually. I had written a book called The Field, my first foray into this science and spirituality bridge. And I'd interviewed many quantum physicists, biologists, people on the frontier who were studying consciousness. And there was a lot of evidence that I wrote about demonstrating that thoughts are things that affect other things. So I am an investigative journalist by background. That's how I started life. And so when somebody says that to me, I want to know, well, how far can we take it? So that's what I asked. I said to myself, okay, well, what are we talking about with this idea of manifestation, intention, all of that? Are we talking about just tiny effects like shifting a quantum particle, or are we talking about curing cancer with our thoughts? So I wanted to find out how much, and I thought about the fact that I knew a lot of scientists in consciousness research by that time. I'd interviewed all of them 20 or more times. And I also had a lot of readers because the field was in 30 languages by then. So I thought if I just put them together, I'll have the largest global laboratory in the world. So that's what I did. When I published my book, The Intention Experiment, that was meant to be not only a roundup of all the evidence on the power of intention, but also an invitation to take part in periodic intention experiments where I would invite all my readers around the world to send an intention to some prearranged target set up by one of the scientists that I would contact to run the study. So we've done that. We've run 41 to date, everything from trying to make seeds grow faster to purifying water to lowering violence, 11 of those, to healing someone of post-traumatic stress disorder. And of the 41, 37 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. Just bear in mind, just take this on board. There's no pharmaceutical drug out there with that kind of consistent track record. But the way I got into smaller groups was just by thinking around that time, so that was 2007, around 2008, I wanted to see if I could shrink this all down into a workshop, because I had a workshop coming up in Chicago, and I was kicking this around with my husband and our staff members and saying, I don't know, maybe, well, I don't know how to bring what we're doing in intention experiments into a workshop setting. Maybe I'll just put people in groups of 8 or so and have them send intention to a member of the group with a health challenge. So my husband, who's also a journalist, a great headline writer, said, I love that, the power of 8. And that's how the name got started. It was just by accident. We didn't expect much. We thought it was going to be just a mild feel-good effect. When we asked people to gather into groups of 8, send intention to a member of the group with a health challenge, and lo and behold, when we asked them to come back the next day, it wasn't a mild feel-good effect like getting your back rubbed. People came back, and the people who had had intention said things like this. I have terrible knee arthritis, and we had noticed it the day before because she was limping badly, but I'm walking normally today. And someone else, I have depression and it feels lifted today. And someone else, I have a bad gut, IBS, and it's normal today. And the most astonishing one, I have cataracts and they're about 80% better. So I was blown away by this, didn't know what to do about it, and kept trying it out in areas around the world. Whenever I was speaking, whenever I was running a workshop, I'd put people into groups of 8 or so and witness amazing healings. So right now I've seen 3 people get up out of wheelchairs. I've seen 2 people who could barely even walk on crutches throw away their crutches. And this is after one 10-minute intention. And reversing cancer and reversing blindness. That's somebody a few years ago in a masterclass of mine. Reversing liver disease that was going to necessitate a liver transplant, and much, much more. So that's how I stumbled onto it, essentially by accident.
It's incredible. I think there's so many things, and there's one of the reasons I brought your book and you into this community is I think, and I wonder if you've ever experienced this, we can hear about so many things that can be overwhelming, either going on in the world or the healthcare system or our own personal lives. And I think for a lot of us, it can come down to like this paralyzing feeling of like, what can we do and how can we help? How can we create an impact? And I think, talking about the power of intention and even maybe getting a little bit into the field, I think it gives us our power back, right? It's like something tangible that we can all do at any time. It doesn't cost money. It brings us back to how powerful we are in our thoughts and our mind as humans, and the impact that we can have in not only healing ourselves, but healing the world. So, you mentioned your book, The Field, and I want to zoom back a little bit and can you talk about what you mean when you say the field? Because I think that's an important piece of this conversation when we go further.
Yes, and that book was inspired by the fact that in the course of doing my research for our health magazine, What Doctors Don't Tell You, I kept coming across very good studies of spiritual healing. And I kept wondering to myself, if you can have a thought and send it to someone else, that must, and make them better, that undermines everything we think about how the body works. That is a completely new paradigm just in itself. So I wanted to find out why things like that work. I thought I was looking for something like human energy fields. But when I talked to frontier scientists and being a journalist is about pulling a piece of string. You keep pulling, and you get more leads, and you get more leads from there. So the first scientist I started talking to, we're talking about.
Are you one of those women like me where you're going 100 miles an hour from the moment you wake up until the moment you go to bed? And maybe you have those moments throughout the day where you're like, I just need like a couple second brain break. So what ends up happening is if we get these few seconds throughout the day, we sit and we catch up on our emails, our social media, our meal planning, anything that is absolutely not this mental break that we need. I know for me, I needed to change this. And so I started incorporating books into my life. And it has made such an impact in me actually getting those mini breaks throughout the day that I created a whole online community around this concept. And I would love to have you in with me. In this community, we meet once a month online. I suggest an empowering, transformational, nonfiction book. We read this together and we apply these concepts to our lives as busy women in order to up-level everything that we're doing. At the same time, we all show up vulnerable, authentic, and willing to support and stretch one another. I would love to see you in there with us. Click the link in the description, sign up today, and we'll invite you in for our next book.
So the first scientist I started talking to, we're talking about human beings as being a packet of vibrating energy, and that we were all part of a giant energy field called the 0 point field, which is a web that envelops all of us. And what I mean by a 0 point field, cold 0 point, because matter vibrates, the subatomic particles vibrate that make up matter, even at temperatures so low, they approximate absolute zero. Now, things are supposed to stop moving then, but they don't. And the reason they don't is that subatomic particles are all involved in a little tiny subatomic game of tennis. They send energy back and forth to other subatomic particles, like this ongoing microscopic game of tennis. And in the act of sending that ball across the net, so to speak, a little virtual particle gets created that's just there for less than a blink of an eye. And then it goes poof and goes away. But that activity creates this field. So we're doing this little dance with all of the other things in all of the universe every minute, every second of every day. And the really interesting part about this is that we aren't separate. Now, a lot of people say we're all one. We all talk about we're all one, but we don't really live that way, and we don't understand what that means. With the 0 point field, it's made up of subatomic particles, which aren't just particles, they're actually vibrating packets of energy, which more closely resemble a wave. Now, subatomic particles, when they bump into each other, they take on each other's information, and they have a near infinite capacity to store information. Imagine the Library of Congress, which has got every book ever published in English. If that were to be put on a subatomic particle, it would be the size of a sugar cube. That's how dense and information-full subatomic particles can be. So that empty space out there, of which we're a part, is also an information repository. Essentially like a Library of Congress of everything that ever was. And that explains how we can access information beyond our senses. That's one way we're picking it up from the field. The other thing is waves go on to infinity. And that would suggest that we can be in touch with every area of the cosmos. So the idea of a 0 point field solves a lot of the conundrums we have about our hidden human potential and our capacities to see beyond our senses, to forecast the future, to do intention, to heal other people, and much, much more.
I love it. I love it. Now, I want to delve into a bit of the science behind intentions. Specifically, what have you guys been measuring, and what scientists have been involved in everything that you're doing?
Okay, a load of scientists. I didn't want to use just one. I used Princeton University and got advice from the late Robert John and the late Brenda Dunn, who started the Princeton Pear Research Program, Princeton Engineering Anomalous Research. And it was all about studying how mind can affect random machines. And they did a 25-year program. It was amazing, and I've written about it in several of my books. So I used them. I used Penn State University with one of the world's experts on water, the late Rustum Roy, and his lab team. I also used Dr. Gary Schwartz from the University of Arizona, a well-known psychologist, doctor, and studies and teaches many, many other things too. I used Dr. Jessica Utz, who is arguably the greatest statistical professor looking at consciousness research. And she's done several of the, she's analyzed several of the experiments we did lowering violence in either violent areas or war zones. So, and she's going to do the analysis of an upcoming intention experiment that we're doing, experiment I've ever done involving participants from all over the world. We're expecting tens of thousands. So I've worked with them. I've also worked with numerous scientists in universities in Europe, including Freiburg University in Germany, St. Petersburg Technical University, it was called, with a leading physicist there who has developed how to measure subtle light emissions from living things. So each of them have measured different things, whether it is statistical examination, looking at light emissions, looking at effects of water, changing pH, looking at whether or not violence went down. We've looked at very different things. I've wanted to use different scientists each time because I didn't want to be accused of bias. I've also worked with Life University, the largest, most prestigious chiropractic university in the world, to look at what happens during Power of Eight groups. And I worked with a team of neuroscientists led by Dr. Stephanie Sullivan. And we found, working with just student volunteers, 7 groups of student volunteers making Power of Eight groups, putting an EEG cap on one member of each group, that we had extraordinary and significant changes in brainwaves in just being part of these Power of Eight groups. Now, what we thought we were going to see were brainwave signatures almost identical to meditation, but that's not what we saw at all. We were shocked. Dr. Sullivan was shocked. Very quickly after being part of a Power of Eight group, the parts of the brain that make us feel separate, the parietal lobes here, and the right frontal lobe that makes us, that's involved in worry, doubt, negativity, they were all dialed way down, as were parts of the brain here also involved with navigating through space, saying, this is me, this is not me. And that's also the parietal lobes. They tell us how to navigate through space, and they were dialed way down. So these were not signatures of somebody involved in meditation. These signatures were almost identical to those recorded by Dr. Andrew Newberg, a neuroscientist at the time working with the University of Pennsylvania. And what he discovered was that this kind of signature was immediately present in Sufi masters during chanting and Buddhist monks during ecstatic prayer. So our student volunteers were undergoing a state of ecstatic oneness, like a Buddhist monk. You know, they were in an altered mystical state. And that's what I hear from Power of Eight groups all the time. They feel like they are in an altered state. They feel like they are part of a bigger whole. They talk about feeling like they're in the beam of the tractor beam of Star Trek and things like that. And what is so interesting is when you talk about a Buddhist monk, that is a person who has undergone years of training, or a Sufi master during chanting, years of training and priming and hours of priming. Our folks were little student volunteers who'd never even meditated before. Nevertheless, they were transported within a minute or two into a state of ecstatic oneness.
It's so incredible. I think one of the many incredible things you're doing is, you're proving the science behind what I think a lot of people are starting to feel and experience. And, Joe Dispenza is another mentor of mine. I know you guys have worked closely together, and I got the opportunity to be at one of his events, and I watched these Power of 8 healing groups. I mean, we've literally watched people get up out of wheelchairs, like you said, or people get on stage that have cured brain cancer. And you can hear these things, and it's like, I think we've been taught as a society to negate the power that we have in us to control our destiny and our health. And so you're making these things that were once, theories or thoughts, like they're ironclad. And I think that's part of your gift, is coming to this as a journalist. So thank you again for all the work that you're doing. I want to bring some of this, these incredible scientific concepts. I want to kind of hone in on this community and anyone listening, and how this can apply into our daily lives. And we're going to get there. But I want to, you have a really interesting relationship with Dr. Emoto. So I want to touch on the power of, water in intention. And can you talk about what you and him did with Lake Biwa? Am I saying that correctly? I was just reading about this in your book, Biwa.
Biwa. Yes, in 2010, Dr. Emoto, who is now passed on, invited me to do an intention experiment to try to purify the water of Lake Biwa, which is the mother lake of Japan. It's just outside Kyoto, and it supplies the water for a good deal of the Japanese population, but it's highly polluted. So at that point, we worked with Dr. Konstantin Korotkov, who is the Russian physicist I mentioned, who has developed ways of measuring light emissions coming out of living things and also going through water, and from that determining the state of its health. So we gathered together 2 samples from Lake Biwa, climbed out on the rocks, got the samples. Dr. Korotkov had one batch that was to be the control and another batch that was supposed to be the intention bottle. And we did it in front of a live audience of about 700, plus my audience around the world who were tuning in live via the internet. And we attempted to move it by 1 pH toward alkalinity, which is healthier. In water, when it's very acidic, it is very unhealthy, and polluted water is usually more acidic. So we wanted to make it more alkaline. And we did, by a full pH compared to the control water. So that happened, again, in 10 minutes. We always do our intentions just for 10 minutes. You don't have to do hours of it. 10 minutes is enough to create radical transformation.
It's amazing. One of my friends, Melanie, I don't know if you've heard of people doing the rice experiment. And I know you have tons of opportunities for intention experiments on your website, which we'll link in the recording. But, it really showed the power of our words and our thoughts and our actions. So It was like this 1 jar of rice, and she said loving words too, and another jar, hateful words, and another jar, the variable, nothing. And to watch the love jar of rice not have mold over months and months. The hate jar instantly had mold. And so, I think, again, just getting back to the water intention experiment, I mean, our bodies are mainly water. And so how can we apply this into, our daily life, setting personal intentions for personal growth and things like that? And how does that have the ability to shift not only our personal experience throughout our day, but actually the greater society and community?
Well, all of those things are possible with group intention. And I've demonstrated it with thousands, tens of thousands of Power of 8 groups. With my work, and particularly when people work with me on my year-long course called the Power of 8 Intention Masterclass, I teach them all the basic tools and techniques for advanced use of intention. And I meet in a live and interactive way with people over Zoom. And so people can work with me interactively, but then we put them in groups in their time zone. And they meet with their groups every week for about an hour for a year. And the reason I do that is the real work and amazing transformation gets supersized in a group. I'm not against people using intention individually in their lives, but I promise you, you will accelerate everything you do when you do it in a small group. I've seen it. I've seen people who were stuck on their health, on their career, with their finances, with relationships, even their life's purpose. And once they got into a group, I can't tell you how many people have joined my masterclass saying, there's a book I kept saying I was going to write and I keep putting it off. I have a whole bunch of people with bestsellers who have taken the course, who finally wrote that book they'd always promised themselves they would do, or people who were down to their last 200 pounds in one instance. And working with her group, this is a woman called Bev, she wanted to set up a company that would be all about accepting and loving birthmarks and things like that, because she had one, a port wine stain. And she's down to 200 pounds. She lives in the UK. And her group does intention for her. And out of nowhere, she gets a grant from Lloyd's of London for many thousands of pounds, enabling her to set up her business. And I've seen that. I mean, I've seen numerous people reverse stage 4 cancer. I've seen numerous people, as I said, reverse deafness in somebody who had become deaf because of radiotherapy, because she had cancer in her ear, restored her hearing, and on and on and on. But also even people who want relationships. We've found there was a woman, this is such a cute story. There was a woman called Joy in her 60s, hadn't had a relationship for many years. And she said, I want to bring love into my life. So her group did an intention for her to have a new relationship. This is during the end of lockdown, by the way. She's in Australia, where they were still very strict about it. From after about a week or two, she gets a call out of nowhere from a boyfriend of hers from 35 years ago. Oh. They start talking over the phone. They start texting. They start writing emails. Upshot is, he's in the UK, by the way. He moves to Australia. He decides to undergo quarantine, which was still in place then, for 2 weeks in a hotel, gets out and meets with Joy, and they're happily ever after now. So I hear these stories, hundreds and hundreds of these stories every year. And it's all about the power of the group. The idea that you've got this group of strangers who become your intention family. They're your tribe. They've got your back. And when a crisis hits, they're there for you. You know, I think about a young man called Tom Speckman. He and his wife, Gilly, had a baby, little baby boy, Hamilton. And within a few days after birth, he had developed a perforated intestine. It was very, very life-threatening. And then once they had a little colonoscopy for this poor little days-old baby. Then he develops pneumonia. And it was up and down respiratory illnesses. Doctors really didn't think he was going to live. So from the very first week that he heard, Tom and Gilly had joined my masterclass. So they announced, as I said, my first 6 weeks of training, 6 sessions, which are 2-hour sessions. It's live and interactive. So they wrote an emergency note in the chat saying, our baby is in really dire straits. Will everybody do an intention? So we did. And every time we did, and we continued doing this, baby Hamilton got better and better and better. He's now a healthy toddler. Doctors did not think he was going to live. And what also happened later that year is Tom and Gilly wanted to set up an alternative medicine clinic. And we did intentions for that with them and their group in particular. And amazing synergies happened. And by the end of the year, not only was Hamilton healthy, but they had started their clinic. They got all the practitioners they needed and everything was starting to fly. So I see that kind of story all the time. We don't get a batch of people to look after us in normal life. We're oftentimes estranged from relatives, maybe we're on our own, but the point is we're more isolated than ever. And I have found that Power of Eight group is an extraordinary healing entity, not only for the people who receive, but the senders too. There's an extraordinary mirror effect that happens when people do intention. It reflects back on them and they get healed as well.
I love it. And, tell me more about the significance of the number 8. Does it have to be a group of 8? Could it be 10, 12? Could it be 6?
Yeah, 8, as I mentioned, was an arbitrary number that I pulled out when I'm talking about it back in 2008. And I said, I don't know, I'll put them in groups of 8 or so. Maybe it was synergistic. 8 is a magic number in many ways. The Chinese believe it's very lucky. It's a sideways infinity sign. There's all those kinds of connotations with 8. But in my experience, group intention works with 6, it works with 12. Goldilocks number is 8. That is a kind of perfect rounded number. It's not too big, it's not too little, but it can work with those different sizes. I think once you get down to 5 or less, it's not really a very good group. Maybe you could do it with 5, but smaller than that, it's not really a group. And once you get beyond about 12 or 13, it gets a little too unwieldy. So I always recommend that 8 or thereabouts.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love all this, and you have an upcoming masterclass, which will be excellent for all the listeners. We'll link that below. What would you recommend for anyone hearing this who's curious, but maybe unsure or not confident about participating as a group member?
Okay, well, first of all, I would really recommend that you watch the documentary that Gaia has just released of me and my work called The Power of Intention. It will take you through all of the scientific studies, or some of the major ones that I've done, plus some of the extraordinary miracle stories. They've actually interviewed some of the people who have had extraordinary healings, whether it was right away or with their Power of Eight group. Now, if people join my community on lynnmctaggart.com, they can just ask to be part of a group. When you want to try to use intention, there's a lot of people talking about manifestation, and frankly, it's not based on a great deal of anything. I've studied the science, I've done the experiments, I've practiced with groups for many years now, so I know what works. And it's beyond wishing and hoping. It's beyond just, I believe, I receive. It needs certain tactics. It needs certain tools. It works better in certain conditions. It needs certain language. There's a right time and a right place for it. There's a number of things like that. There are visualizations, the mental rehearsal, and much, much more. So I have classes of every level for people who want to really dive in. If people want to do things and just find out a little bit more, by joining my website, I have all kinds of little tools, free tools that they can use to get started. Plus, if they join the community, I also have free tools to help them use them in a wider sense in their community. One of the things that I've been working on at the moment is a thing I like to call the 8 revolution, because with all of the upsets and uncertainty going on in the world, people are a little worried about their lives. They don't know what's coming next. And it certainly looks like the folks in charge don't know what they're doing. So I was thinking about that one day, and I was thinking, we need an army of change makers. And then I realized we have an army of change makers. There are tens of thousands of Power of Eight groups out there. So I've put free tools on my community site for people to access to set up a little Power of Eight group in their neighborhood and start using it to make change from the bottom up. So all of these things are available. There's loads of other things on my website, lynnmctaggart.com, all kinds of free information, free tools that people can make use of.
I love it. You're clearly passionate about connection and community, which I love as well. I think we need that more, now more than ever. So what would you say, what do you think is our number one barrier to connection and community? And I would ask, how would we overcome that? I think you pretty much just answered that, but what's the number one barrier preventing us from finding our community?
Well, I think life is very isolating at the moment. We're all overworked. We all have no time. We all fritter away an awful lot of time online and in social media and all of that sort of stuff. We that takes up a lot of our time. We're starting more and more to get used to just connecting virtually with people and not really diving into their lives. We live lives of big separation now. We don't get to know our neighbors like we did a couple of generations ago. And then lockdown was just devastating for people. It created a forced isolation for a couple of years. This has been demonstrated now and admitted by many governments to have been a big mistake. It's harmed children. Children's brains have aged by 4.5 years and aged in a bad way because they didn't have the ability to connect with friends and colleagues and students, which enables them to grow and develop and mature. So I think it's our lifestyles now. As I say, we don't really know our neighbors very well. And we certainly don't connect with them all that much. So people are starved for community because the other thing about this is, and I wrote all about this in my book, The Bond, we need community more than we need to breathe. The science shows us that when we are connecting to community, we thrive in every way. Stroke, even the common cold. And even when we have a genetic propensity to some big illness, like depression, there was a study they did of this. When they compared two groups of people, Americans who had the depression gene, I'll call it, and Filipinos who had the depression gene, there was far less incidence of depression among the Filipinos than Americans, even though the Filipinos had the worst gene, actually. But the reason was they live in extended family environments. They're very close to their extended family, and community protected them. Community always protects people. We need to belong, as I say, more than we need to breathe. So what I'm kind of the centerpiece of my work, and I think this is probably one of the big things that distinguishes me from other people in this field, is I'm a woman and I have a feminine perspective about this. And for me, it's about sharing community, connection, giving, altruism, all of that. And I've seen also the power of altruism. Altruism isn't just a nice thing to do. Gosh, isn't that nice? I gave to that charity. Altruism is a necessary thing for us to do because the science is really clear. When we do things for other people, no matter how small, we live longer, healthier, happier lives. And the biggest scientific study that convinced me of the power of altruism was a study looking at the immune system markers of two groups of people. One group had all the money and stuff in the world and went on all of the great holidays. They were what we would call pleasure seekers. They were living the dream. They were living the dream. So the scientists thought, well, they're going to have great immune system markers. They can afford the finest wine and food and this and that. And what they found shocked them. These were people who had terrible immune systems. These were people who were going to soon drop like flies. They were perfect candidates for heart attacks, Alzheimer's, diabetes, every degenerative disease. The other group were not as wealthy. They didn't have as many holidays or stuff, but they were living a life of service. And these people had totally robust immune systems. They were going to live forever. So that was probably the starkest and most convincing study I've seen of the power of altruism. And everything I see and read about doing for other people, it's what actually gives people life's meaning. And so that's the other wonderful thing about a Power of Eight group. 7/8 of the time, you're intending for someone else. And that's reflecting back on you. I talked about the mirror effect. When you do intention for someone else, you yourself are healed. I've seen that so many times when people are stuck. Invariably, I'll say to them, get off of yourself. Do intention for this person over here who probably needs it more than you. And when they do, extraordinary things happen. Andy Spiros was stuck, couldn't get a job, needed money, going through a divorce, two small kids, couldn't get anything. And when I told her to intend for someone else in her group who really needed money, she got a job that next week, a dream job out of nowhere. This person called her up. She didn't even know this person, hadn't even applied for that job, got a dream job. And a guy called Wes, who was a Vietnam vet who had he had a really tragic life. He was going to be a doctor or a biochemist, but got called up in the last year of the Vietnam War. And there were no student deferments by then. So he had to fight. It was so traumatizing. He came home, dropped out of college, and his life just went in a downward spiral. Even lost the love of his life after a few years, who died of a brain cancer. And he lost his house paying for her medical bills. It was a terrible story. So when I met him, he was barely able to get up out of bed. He did one intention for someone else in a group who had cancer. And the next day and the day after, he had an extraordinary transformation. He was like Scrooge on Christmas morning, suddenly having avoided everybody. He's running around being in love with everybody. He started power walking. He started joining classes, getting back in touch with his church. His life was transformed. And as he said, he had had this vision that night after doing 2 nights, after doing the intention of meeting his young self, his 19-year-old self on campus. And the self essentially saying to him, there's still time. So he truly was. It was a bit like the ghost of Christmas yet to come, who changed his life. And it was all about intending for someone else. That radiated and reflected back on him too.
It's so beautiful, so, so beautiful. And, I think one of the most powerful things I heard in all of that, in addition to all the incredible stories, is you are one of the only females in this space. And
Yeah.
we as females bring a completely different lens to these kinds of concepts, to everything. And, I think one of those things that we bring as women is I don't even want to say the belief, like the knowingness of our intuition and
Mm-hmm.
our power. And so I want to ask you, with all the research you've done, all the experience you've had, like, what are we, and I want a feminine perspective on this, because I've heard it from the guys out there, like, what are we truly capable of as humans? Whether that's like our intuition, our ability to heal others, our ability to heal ourselves, telepathy, and, knowing just all the things. Like, what do you think we can actually be capable of?
All of those things and more. I mean, we're far grander than we've been told.
Mhm.
And the reason that we don't believe that is because we've been told a certain scientific story. And we abide by that story and not our intuition. Little kids know that they have certain powers. They know this, but it gets drummed out of us in school by our various authority figures, our parents, or whomever. But many of us still know in our hearts we do have these powers. And so, what I'm trying to do is to appeal to both sexes by saying, okay, here's all the science folks, but also trying to open up the heart. And that's what one person told me, because one of the things that has amazed me the most in all of this journey is watching what happens to people taking part in a big intention experiment. Now, in the past number of years, I've put together warring people. Like I had Arabs from 8 different locations join in with Israeli Jews doing an intention to lower violence in Jerusalem in the end of 2017. And we filmed the whole thing with special equipment, enabling us to talk to all the different groups and let them talk to each other. And these people refused to even talk to each other in the beginning. I had to broker the whole thing. And by the end, they were sending love to each other. They were saying, your God is my God. And that to me just blew my mind because I realized it's so beyond just getting stuff. This is a way to heal the world. And I started thinking about numbers because I was also really interested in evidence from Harvard that when you do something kind for someone else, it ripples 3 degrees down a social network, which turns into if Jim is nice to Paul, Paul's going to be more likely to be nice to Peter, who's more likely to be nice to Jane, who's more likely to be nice to Sam, and so forth. And they keep continuing to be nice, Sam and Peter and Paul, etc., going forward. So I started calculating this. I thought, okay, let's imagine if 150, everybody has 150 friends, and that's the average people say. 150 contacts in your social circle. If each of those people, let's say in the last big intention experiment I did for Israel, Gaza, we had 30,000 people. Each of them is transformed like this and feels more love for people. That turns into essentially, and they keep rippling down their social network, that turns into half the population of Israel. And then if they keep going with it, it ends up turning into, or even if they know more people, it can potentially turn into 7 billion people with my math. That's the population of the world. So what I start thinking about, you're doing more than research. You're opening people's hearts. And that's the feminine side that I see that I represent is my work is, I calculate the numbers for anybody who needs all of that proof, but I'm also opening people's hearts. When people get involved with intention experiments, lots of things happen. About half of the people, and I survey the people and have done since 2008, feel more love for everyone they come in contact with. So when I start looking at that, I realize ultimately, we don't just have the power, these various, Jedi Knight powers. We also have the capacity to heal ourselves, heal each other, and heal the world. And that's my big job now, I think. And it's what I'm trying to bring to the world with my intention experiments, because I see that. I see people also, about 40% each time, make up with estranged partners or parents or children, are getting along better with their bosses and their coworkers. And all of that demonstrates to me that coming together in a group with a common intention is healing for everyone involved. And that's what I want to do with my big peace intention experiment. We're running it on February 1st, and it is one with a focus on a particular city that's going to be meaningful for everybody in the world. We're inviting people from all over the world. This is completely free, as is the Gaia documentary, which invites people as well to the experiment. But the point is not just the target. Maybe we'll lower violence as we have done. The big target is healing the hearts of everyone who takes part and allowing that to ripple around the world.
That's so, so beautiful. Well, I know everyone has the opportunity to participate in that, so we'll link everything below. I want to ask you one last question, and then you can let everyone know where they can find you, how they can participate in this group intention. What do you see as the future of setting intentions for the world?
What I see is that people will recognize that they can't just look to their leaders. We have to change from the bottom up. Every important social movement has started with small groups and started from the bottom up. Gandhi changed the course of India and liberated it from British rule by taking little spinning wheels and giving them to people in different little communities, enabling them to liberate themselves from dependence on the British industry, British textiles, they were able to do it themselves. And that ultimately created a giant revolution. Martin Luther King started with a ragtag group of people. And by intelligently marching and enabling certain of the shots, photographs of prejudice in the South to be photographed and then sent around to newspapers, went from a tiny group to a giant, giant movement, and so forth. Thus it's ever been. Big change starts with small groups. And so I feel that the revolution that's necessary now is going to have to start from the bottom up. And it's going to have to start from the recreation of communities, because that's how we were supposed to live. That's how we thrive.
Ah, so beautiful. I love that. It's a battle cry.
It
But
is.
it kind of brings us back to things we were talking in the beginning. Like when you feel conflicted with what's going on in the world or your community or anything, you can bring it back to us as the individual and, more importantly, our group and our community. Thank you, Lynne. Just real quick, tell us about your upcoming exciting events that people can participate in.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, Gaia has released a new documentary about me. It's free for everybody to see. It's sitting in front of the paywall in Gaia, so you don't have to be a member, and you can just click on the link that we have below and view it. And it's also an invitation to take part in that giant peace intention experiment and create not only peace with our target, but peace in your own heart and with those around you. And that's February 1st. It's also free, and you can connect on the link that we're going to share. And finally, my masterclass. If you want to study with me and learn the 13 keys to intention mastery, how to deal with negative intention, how to use intention in relationships, even with ones that you don't think you'll ever be able to get along with, you can join that on February 22nd and just click on the link below.
So beautiful. All right, Lynne, we're going to wrap this public podcast. I'm going to let my Beehive member community hang out after and ask their Q&A. Thank you so much for being here. For all the listeners, click on all the links below. Highly encourage you to participate in Lynne's upcoming events. I know I will. Thank you for being here, Lynne.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the discussion of our most recent book in Book Nook. If you're loving these deep conversations and dives into transformative books, be sure to join Best Friends Book Nook, my free online community for women, where we explore life-changing reads together every month. I'll link that below. If you want to take it a step further, Beehive members, my private membership, get exclusive perks like staying on as a live audience for our podcast recordings and even getting to ask the authors their burning questions. All the details for Book Nook or become a Beehive member are linked in the description below. Let's keep the conversation going, and I'll see you soon in the next episode.